Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture Albion Never Dies. In this episode, I'm looking at the Britishness of Quantum of Solace, Daniel Craig's second Bond film, the shortest Bond film in the run, released in 2008. To help me look at this film, I have 5 friends from 4 continents who are going to help me unravel the concepts and ideas and locations of this film. If you have never seen this film, hopefully this will give you a good reason to watch it. There's no major spoilers, we're just talking about themes, ideas and places. So even if you've seen it a long time ago, hopefully this episode will help you come back to it fresh and with renewed enjoyment. And to help me introduce this, I have a very special guest, David Zaritsky of the Bond Experience.
Thomas, it's David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience. Thanks for having me on your show about the Britishness of Quantum of Solace. I think Quantum of Solace is grown in the appreciation of the Bond community over time. And I think it's because of several things. First of all, I think the style aspect is unquestionable. I think that it shows a very badass James Bond. I think Daniel Craig is phenomenal. He's the Bond that everybody sort of emulates, that cool, calculating, always assured Bond. But I think also it is an adventure. It's a triumphant Bond, and I think he's triumphant for, at the time, Queen and Country, now King and Country. And I think the alignment to the Britishness of it all has a lot to do with the success and how it's appreciated globally.
Thank you very much to David for that perfect introduction to this stylish Daniel Craig film. We will talk about the style later. He stressed the diphthong in Craig because that's commonly a difference between British and American English, the use of diphthongs. And he talked about the growing appreciation for this film. One person who is definitely appreciative of this film is my next contributor, also from the USA.
Donnie from Quantum of History here. Thanks, Thomas, for having me on. I love this topic. For me, Quantum of Solace is vibes. It's got everything you kind of want Bond to be without the story. The story, I mean, the only thing it's missing is the story. Story is super weak, the villain is weak. But as far as Bond himself, the way Craig portrays him, the style, the cars, the look, Quantum of Solace really hits the mark for me in those aspects. If only there was a better story, Quantum of Solace would be much higher in the rankings for all-time Bond. As far as the Britishness, I think it's interesting to see the movie where it portrays both the U.S. and the British having a little old-time colonialism, meddling in Bolivia's dictatorship, showing that they still have influence all throughout the world, and combating this new organization that's coming in and trying to dominate their spheres of influence when they feel that that's their autonomy. They have a stranglehold on the market of colonialism in the area. Thanks for having me on, Thomas. This is Donnie from Quantum of History, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much to Donnie for sharing his appreciation of this James Bond film, except perhaps for the weakness of the story. This is, of course, the shortest of any James Bond film at only 106 minutes. He talks about the aspects of colonialism, especially at this time, 2008, tensions between the UK and the US. This really highlights the difficulties of the UK-US relationship. And my next guest, is my previous guest, David Zaritsky of the Bond Experience, talking about the Britishness of this film from his unique perspective.
So the moments that smack of Britishness, and of course this is a Yankee saying this, so what do I know? But even from a global standpoint, I think that there are alignments to duty. Even when they're in the safe house in Siena and Bond and M are going back and forth, there's a certain Britishness to it. It's all, they're taking the mickey out of each other, which again is very British. But they're also being polite. There's a certain etiquette, a certain properness that I see in only the British. And even having a drink, I mean, that's not something I would think of any other culture other than the British. You have to love that aspect. But then they finally do get to London. And once they're in London, it's raining. I mean, the very introduction to London doesn't even need the London titles that Mark Forrester puts on there because it's raining. Where else does it rain so much? Well, gloomy, rainy London. And of course, it's not always gloomy and rainy, but I think Quantum shows that extremely well. And looking out on the apartment and the whole movement, the whole, I'll say, demeanor and behavior of the other MI6 agents that are part of M's group also smacks of Britishness. There's a certain uprightness to them. There's a certain etiquette. There's a certain amount of respect that I think they hold for each other. Even when Bond is, giving his knife back to them and he's knocking them out in the elevator, you could say that's a very brutal moment, but it's brutal because there's such a proper moment to the whole aspect of it. And I think this Britishness that exudes from Quantum of Solace is there in spades.
Thank you very much to David of the Bond Experience, and I, for one, very, very much appreciate a Yank's perspective on Britishness. I really liked how he highlighted the importance of duty to James Bond, which is unusual in films generally. There's no shortage of movie heroes motivated by "this time it's personal." Not to suggest that's absent from the film. It is there, it's one of Bond's motivations, but that tension between the personal and duty is something that again runs through the film. Which one ultimately wins out? Well, you'll have to watch the film a couple more times and decide for yourself which one is the stronger motivator. I certainly have my view, but I won't give too many spoilers here. I did like, again, his focus on the banter versus the politeness between Bond, M, and the other MI6 staff. I think when the relationship is a bit better, they're able to joke a bit more. They're professional, but still willing to have a laugh with each other. But as the relationship becomes more and more tense, then they start to become more and more proper and more polite. And, when times are good, they're willing to have a drink with their boss. And that's something I have seen almost uniquely in British and Irish workplaces, whether it's people working in the city, in academia, in publishing, in finance. I have certainly come across that more in British workplaces than anywhere else, having a bit of a boozy lunch on a good day. And yes, people working for the government, I know people who've done that. So I very much like that. And I'd say one of the other points he mentions is London. Where could you go in London? If only I knew somebody who had created a map of James Bond locations specifically for London. If only I could get a contribution from that guy.
Thomas, it's Pete Brooker here from There Will Be Bond and London Bond Map. Thank you for asking me to add a little voice note for your episode. I look forward to hearing it. So if you're in London and you're looking for locations from the Quantum of Solace, I recommend you head to the Barbican, which I'm sure you'll be talking about on this episode. You can get cocktails there, I believe, for about £12. They serve Vespers, martinis, they have happy hour there, and it is actually a James Bond location. James Bond went there, unlike other bars in London that claim the same. All right, thanks, Thomas, and see you soon.
Thank you very much to Pete Brooker of There Will Be Bond and the London Bond Map. He is, of course, an expert on James Bond locations in London. There's no shortage of them. For those who do not follow his account or his podcast, first of all, please do. And if you do, you'll be aware that there's a long-running discussion about the bar Duke's. Duke's is a relatively expensive bar in London, which claims to be Ian Fleming's bar. They claim this is where James Bond's Vesper Martini was invented, Vesper cocktail, and the amount of evidence for this is the square root of nothing. However, they keep claiming this, and this has become something of a point of concern for Pete, who just like to see a bit of evidence. There are other bars in London. I should say at this point, I've never been to Duke's. There's plenty of other genuine Ian Fleming locations, places he's written about, and there's places that James Bond has been in London, so Duke's is relatively low down on my list. I have been to the Barbican, and actually I found it thanks to Pete's map, because I actually found it quite difficult to navigate around. There's the map, there's the app that goes with it. It is an art centre a good place to see a concert. There's a conservatory. It's a cool place to walk around. And yes, there is a decent bar. One of the best things about the James Bond fandom is the real James Bond community. So you've heard from Pete, an expert on the London Bond locations. You've heard two fans from the United States, Donnie and David. And now I'm very, very happy to introduce Gabriel Rabanales, who is from Chile, which is where large segments of Quantum of Solace was filmed. It doubles for Bolivia. We will talk about that, one country doubling for the other. We'll talk about some of the locations, and we'll talk about the British-Chilean connection. Please do enjoy this 15-minute interview.
Okay, first of all, Gabriel, thank you very, very much for joining me.
Thanks to you for your kind invitation, Thomas.
And it's wonderful. We've been talking online through Instagram for, we said, about 5 years, right?
Yeah, I think it's 5 years I think it's a wonderful friendship, at least electronically.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's great to be able to connect across the world. And your account is the style is not enough, right?
Yeah, it's an account of, as you can say, James Bond, of course, but also men's style, books, movies, and many more.
And you do share about your own writing as well.
Well, I'm a writer of adventure novels, especially a series of novels called The Adventures of Captain Hunt. I published them on Amazon, both in Kindle and paperback. Now I'm writing the sixth novel. I pretend to release it some months in the future. Well, as you know, I write James Bond fan fiction also. So this is my genres.
Yes, and I must give the disclaimer. One of the great characters in your books was, of course, Thomas Crichton.
Yes, Thomas Crichton appears in one of my fan fiction bonds. Yes.
Great character. I love it. And so you are a James Bond fan. You live in Chile. So, of course, I have to ask you about Quantum of Solace.
Well, as you know, the film was filmed here in Chile in location in the Atacama Desert, in the Antofagasta region, and Calama region, where is located the Paranal Observatory. The striking and very beautiful Perla de las Dunas is actually the residence, the living quarters of the astronomers of Paranal Observatory. Many of these scenes were filmed in Chile. The scene where Bond and Camille arrives to the airstrip and get the DC-3 airplane was also filmed in Chile. And all the scenes with the village with no water, with the village of the water shortage, was also filmed here in location in Chile.
Yeah, so all the deserts, basically all the desert shots, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that big hotel right at the end, which I understand you have seen.
Yeah, I've seen the entrance, the main gate of the Paranal Observatory, but not the actual residence. Sadly, it's a private place. It's a workplace for astronomers, so private citizens are not allowed in the interiors.
Fair enough, fair enough. Now, obviously, Bond is huge here in the UK, right? If a Bond actor comes close to where I live, all my messages blow up and they say, you must go out and see Pierce Brosnan or Ralph Fiennes or whoever. When Bond came to Chile, was it big news?
Yes, it was very huge news. Not too many movies are filmed in Chile because we are very far from the US or Europe, but we have very beautiful landscapes, and the sense of adventure, the sense of exoticism required for Bond was greatly fulfilled by our landscape in the desert. So when Bond came to Chile, it was very, very big news. But as you probably know, there was some controversy because we soon learned that all the locations were meant to be featured as Bolivia, not Chile. Chile was a filming location, but doubling for Bolivia. And Chile and Bolivia had a war, a very big war, sadly, in the late 19th century. And the war was won by Chile. It was a war between Chile and a confederacy of Peru and Bolivia, and we defeated both. And sadly, there are some animosity between the countries even today. So it was big news, but at the same time was a little controversial.
Yeah, yeah. Could I ask if the filming region was part of the region from the war? Is this?
Yes, the war actually was fought in the very same region where the movie was filmed, the Antofagasta region. Originally, all the region was Bolivian, and now it's Chilean. So, for many people, not me, of course,
Mhm.
but so many people resented greatly the filming in Chile, but doubling as Bolivia and not Chile proper.
Understand?
But
Yeah.
but it's understandable because well, you know the plot of the movie. The plot of the movie was suited for Bolivia, not for Chile. It has a political. It was a rather political film, Quantum of Solace,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
yes, it's one of the most political films of the saga, I guess, because it depicts a coup d'état
Hmm.
by Mr. Green and his associates with General Medrano.
Mm.
So it was fitting perhaps for Bolivia, but not for Chile. But the filming was in Chile because we have more secure locations, more tourist locations, perhaps not available in actual Bolivia.
Yeah. So Bond doesn't save Chile because you don't need it. You're okay.
Yes, fortunately, we don't need the assistance of Bond. Yes.
Fair enough. And the UK and Chile do have a long history, right, of partnership.
Yes, yes. Chile and Great Britain have a long history of some historical figures like Thomas Cochrane, who built our navy. Our founding father is called Bernardo Higgins, O'Higgins. huh? We in Spanish said O'Higgins, but it's O'Higgins. He has an Irish ancestry. Of course, his father was Irish, but he was serving for Spain, of course. So I think we have some connections. Although we are not an island like Great Britain, we are isolated geographically from
Mm.
the rest of South America. So we have certain cultural elements very different from the rest of South America. And I guess it's very similar between Britain and the rest of Europe.
Mm.
So I guess these are our similarities between Great Britain and Chile.
It's very interesting. And before we started, you mentioned an old phrase, an old saying about Chileans.
Yes, it's an old saying. I don't know it's true, but it's a saying anyway that says like this: Chilean or Chilean people are the English of South America. Chilean are the English of South America. It's a nice saying because it reflects on our isolated culture, our punctuality. Here in Chile, British punctuality is it's very well regarded.
Hmm. Okay.
So I think we have some elements. We love tea. We are one of the countries with the most consumption of tea, I guess, only second to Britain itself.
Oh, how interesting. Okay. And you
Yeah.
mentioned punctuality. For the record, I know that this call began exactly on time for both of us.
Okay.
Oh, fantastic. So is this seen as in a complimentary way? Is this a jokey way? How is this phrase perceived that Chileans are the English of South America?
Yeah, I guess we are both people, the Chilean and the English, with some similar goals. We love to be seen as
Mhm.
very cultured people. I'm not saying the other countries aren't, of course, but it's the way we see ourselves. We try to be very polite, and as I saying, we have the same isolation and differences, even in accent, with other South American countries. In fact, other South American people came to Chile, and they don't understand how we talk.
Oh.
Yes, our accent, the Chilean accent from Spanish, the Chilean language, if you want, it's very different from the Argentinian Spanish, from the Colombian Spanish, from the Venezuelan Spanish. We have many our own words. So I guess it's similar between England or Great Britain with the other continental countries in Europe.
Yeah,
I guess
yes.
those are the similarities between our two countries.
Yeah, and yeah, I think linguistic identity is really important in England. Like people comment on accents a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. And of course, that the partnership does between Chile and the UK it carries on even to today. So I had a quick Google, just looked at Chilean UK relations, and the first thing that came up is our Prime Minister, who is still new. He's only been Prime Minister for months, not a year yet, but he has met with the President of Chile, and it's one of the first things that comes up. Uh,
Ah, that's very nice. Yes, I think they met in a summit or something. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And after Britain left the EU, Chile was one of the first countries that we had a trade agreement with. So, if not
Oh,
the
yes.
first.
Okay.
Again, I must have kind of pull back to Quantum of Solace. When you're watching the film, is there anything that really stands out to you as very Bolivian or very Chilean, considering that where it's supposed to be and where it really is?
Welcome to the Living Limitless podcast. Raw, honest, and unapologetically unfiltered. Whether we're fumbling through starting businesses, awkwardly figuring out content creation, or navigating wellness trends that sometimes feel like punishment, we lay it all out. Chaos and all. Throw in some travel adventures, life's curveballs, and a generous dose of sarcasm, and you've got a podcast where nothing is off limits. We're here to share the real journey. Messy, unpredictable, and occasionally hilarious. Because if we can figure this out, so can you. Probably.
Yeah, it's very curious because when I saw the movie back in 2008, if I remember correctly, um, some parts of the landscape are very typical Chilean. The
Oh,
desert in Chile is different from the desert in Bolivia, so you can recognize our own country.
mhm.
Although the people is dressed, especially women, in the scene in the village with no water, the women are dressed in Bolivian fashion, the Bolivian indigenous fashion, but the landscape is very Chilean. And there are a very funny scene when Bond requests to the operator of the airfield to get the DC-3 plane.
Mhm.
The man, of course, is depicted as Bolivian, but he looks to Bond and says in a very Chilean accent, ¿Qué es lo que quiere? Do you
Ah,
remember the scene?
yes.
Watch it again, and the man says in a very harsh tone, ¿Qué es lo que quiere? And this is a very Chilean accent. I
Oh,
guess you don't understand what I'm saying. Is
no, I
what do
remember
you
the line, but
want? What do you want?
mhm.
But he says in Spanish, but in Chilean Spanish. It's very funny. All the people in the cinema started to laugh because it was very Chilean and not Bolivian.
Oh, that's really
I
interesting.
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the key scenes where you can say, "Oh yes, this is Chile and not
Mm.
Bolivia."
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I've only come across this before when, if there's a film set in Iraq, there's a few Iraq war films, but when they speak Arabic, you're like, they're Egyptians. You can just
Yeah.
hear the accent and it can take you out of the film. I didn't know that about Quantum of Solace.
Yeah, it's because what I'm saying before, the linguistic differences between Chileans and Bolivians or Argentinians is very strong. So for a Chilean, you can recognize your accent in anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
We in Chile have another saying that it is, there's always a Chilean. There's always a Chilean. What it means, everywhere in the world, in the most remote areas, you will find a Chilean and you will recognize him for the accent. It's true. It's true. We have compatriots in the most incredible places in the world.
I'm curious, what's the most unlikely place that you've met a fellow Chilean?
Oh, I don't know. One day, many years ago, I was in Venice, in Italy, and I was surrounded by Venetians, Italians. And then I remember, it was in, I forgot the crystal fabrics
Hmm.
in Murano. It's called Murano. And all the workers were Italians, were Venetians. And then one of the workers, the guys who blow the glass, something similar to the glass show in Moonraker.
Hmm.
And then the guy says something, and immediately I pointed my finger to him and said, "You're Chilean." "Yes, I am," he said.
Oh, wow.
One of the workers in Murano blowing glass was Chilean.
Oh, that's amazing.
Was very, very, very strange.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I have to say, thank you very, very much for joining me. I mentioned near the beginning that Bond has not been to Chile. Can I ask, if he did, would you want him to?
Yes, I guess the most striking locations for
Mm.
Bond to visit in real Chile is our southern landscape. We have the most amazing glaciers, the most amazing lakes between large forests with the Andean mountains as background. I guess it would be a really amazing Bond film
Hmm.
located in southern Chile.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. And he will have his local contact in Chile with you.
I hope so. I really hope so.
Thank you so much to Gabriel Rabanales at The Style Is Not Enough on Instagram. Please do check out his account and send him a message. Ask him about his writing. I really enjoyed discussing the Britishness and the Chileanness of James Bond Quantum of Solace. Now, one thing I've scarcely touched on so far is what is normally the first thing people touch on with Quantum of Solace, which is the style. James Bond is particularly stylish in this 2008 outing. He's normally pretty stylish, but this is thought to be a particular high point of Daniel Craig's tenure. Now, often people talk about the suits. This is the film where the Tom Ford suits came into their own, as you'd know if you've read Chapter 15 of From Tailors with Love, An Evolution of Menswear Through the Bond Films by Peter Brooker and Matt Spazer. They say, unlike what would later come with Craig's suits, Frogley, the costume designer, did not believe in the suits being too tight. They talked about the continuity. The suit jackets continued with Bond's usual since GoldenEye. 3-button front, but now the lapels roll down the middle button to give the jackets the silhouette of a 2-button cut. This style is sometimes known as the 3-roll-2 or a button-2 show-1, among other names. It's a style most associated with Neapolitan tailors and the American Ivy League, but the Tom Ford suit is agnostic to both these styles. It's inspired by the strongest silhouettes of Savile Row, reminding us of Bond's stylistic heritage. It made quite a big impact on me when I saw it in the cinema 2008, and later on 2015, well, I was in a job where suddenly I could afford tailor-made suits, and I had to work out, well, what did I want? I had a few tailor-made suits bought for me by my parents as Christmas presents and so on before, by Indian tailors in Oman. 2015, I was in China, and it was a Cantonese tailor I was talking to, and we were trying to work out what was it that made a suit a good suit for me. And for fabrics, she was fantastic. For the overall design, I had to find something, and I really went back to these suits of Quantum of Solace, and it very much influenced my wardrobe, which do check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/British Culture if you want to see more of that, or of course my Instagram, Fleming Never Dies, if you want to see static images. But whenever we're leaning into the Britishness of something, I'm always curious about the counter-narrative. If something appears to be British, I feel it's worth asking, is it? Is it really? Because another aspect of the style of Quantum of Solace is the casual clothes. And a lot of people have commented how the casual clothes of Quantum of Solace are influenced by all-American guy, Steve McQueen. If only there was an Instagram account called @DressingLikeMcQueen by a very, very good fellow named Lincoln McConnell Brown, who could tell me all about Steve McQueen's influence on Daniel Craig in Quantum of Solace.
Hi, Lincoln McConnell Brown here from Dressing Like McQueen, which can be found on both Facebook and Instagram. My page aims to break down the various looks Steve McQueen adopted over his well-documented life, both on film and in his personal life, and perhaps give some inspiration to those out there who want to add a touch of McQueen's style to their daily looks as well. There's no doubt that Daniel Craig has been influenced greatly by the King of Cool, as he's often been photographed wearing Barracuda Harrington jackets, cardigans, jeans and boots. There are even photos from behind the scenes from The Making of Spectre where Craig was seen and photographed wearing McQueen's Persol folding sunglasses. It's well accepted that Craig's personal choices were taken on board during his time as Bond, and this is most prevalent during Bond's adventures in Quantum of Solace. In Quantum, Bond is seen riding a motorcycle after dispatching of Mr. Slate, wearing a light colour Levi jean and a black blouson, all very McQueen. In the scene where Bond visits Mathis, he's wearing the shawl neck cardigan and a white shirt, just as McQueen did in that famous photo shoot with William Claxton back in the 1960s. And the ending sees Bond wearing the Tom Ford Harrington in black, again another nod to McQueen. From my point of view, the influence of McQueen on Craig and Bond cannot be underestimated, especially when McQueen's influence is so strong in a movie which I note is certainly seen as one of the most sartorially on point of all the Bond movies, even after all these years. And maybe Steve McQueen has got a little bit to do with that.
Thank you very much to Lincoln McConnell Brown, who you can find on Instagram and Facebook @DressingLikeMcQueen, for giving me an Australian's perspective on how an American influenced the Britishness of Quantum of Solace, at least in terms of style. And I should also say, as we come close to the end, thank you once again to Gabriel Rabinalis at The Style Is Not Enough for giving me a Chilean perspective on Britishness and Quantum of Solace. Thank you to Pete Brooker at the London Bond Map, who gave me his hometown perspective. When James Bond comes to town, do look up Pete Brooker. And thank you to David Zaritsky of the Bond Experience, Donny Waldron at Quantum of History, for giving me a US perspective on Quantum of Solace. And finally, thank you very much for listening.